be honest, the worst is trying to say, how many hours do you think this is worth? How many hours do you think you'll need from that performance manager or that account manager? I just don't have enough information. We haven't had a conversation.
My name's Mike Lander, and you're listening to Higgle, the B2B Sales Club podcast, where we bring you actionable insights about sales RFPs, negotiations, and difficult procurement discussions from sales leaders, brand leaders, and procurement leaders. Please subscribe to get updates when new episodes are released. Hi. On this episode of Higgle, the B2B Sales Club, I talk to Chris Jones, CEO at Space and Time. In this episode with Chris, we talk about the shift towards value-based pricing models and the challenges that brings, the importance of negotiation mindset and understanding the true motivations of a client, how to navigate the triangle of doom between agency, procurement, and brand, and then also we'll touch on RFP qualification and conversion rates. So without further ado, let's get into the episode. Chris, thanks ever so much for joining me on the podcast today. How are you?
I'm very well, Mike. Good to see you, as always.
Exactly. Yeah, we had a good time last week at that event.
Yeah, it was good. It was always, I always go into these events and it's you always learn something. I've still got my notes right in front of me from that session. So it was, it was really, really interesting, as usual.
It was really good, wasn't it? It was a good mixture of agencies and with Gareth as well, giving some insights on the brand side. Gareth
was really interesting. Yeah, he's actually sent me through some research because we had a chat at the end of it,
yes.
and there's no doubt, and I'm sure we'll come to it today, but just trying to kind of overcome that dichotomy between procurement, marketing, agency, and he certainly had a few solutions there, which
exactly, and we'll definitely cover that.
No doubt.
Again, anyone that's listening, that's about the kind of what I often call the triangle of doom between procurement, the marketing agency, and the marketing brand director, marketing leader. So we'll come to that hopefully later on, Chris.
Cool.
So first of all, who are you? What do you do? And anything you want to talk about something unusual about yourself?
So I'm Chris Jones. I'm chief executive of a media group called Space and Time. I guess the best way to kind of summarize us, because I'm always really keen to ensure that we're not seen as a sort of a conventional business. Our capability that we've got kind of spans right the way across your sort of media, planning, strategy, activation, and all of the channels that you need to engage with customers right the way through the journey. But then also we have a kind of an established technology business that sits alongside that ensures that we've got all of the right technological and kind of data-led products to support the strategy and optimization, activation of those campaigns. And then there's a few things in between that allow us sort of our operating model to kind of combine the solutions that sit across those two areas of our business to kind of deliver what we call growth marketing outcomes for clients. So I'm always reluctant to group us into a sort of media business or a digital business or fully into a technology business. I think we're in that growth marketing area in the middle where we're kind of laser focused on trying to kind of drive those growth marketing outcomes, we call them, for clients.
Excellent.
Something strange about me, I'm not sure if it's strange, but I guess I'm a serial learner. You know, I from a personal and a kind of professional background, I think friends and colleagues can be equally enthused and frustrated by that attribute. You know, for example, COVID, I'm not sure there wasn't an instrument I didn't learn over that period of time. Thank God for YouTube. So, you know, I learned guitar, I learned drums, I picked up golf at one point. You could look at it another way. You could say I'm a jack of all trades and a master of none. But I also apply that in a kind of professional space as well. And I really try to encourage the people within our business and clients, in fairness, to constantly look to learn and apply and test new things and see if you can push your horizon and your business's horizon forwards. And I think a lot of that comes from, taking yourself out of your comfort zone and learning something different.
Exactly.
So I'm not sure it's sort of overly unusual or different, but I certainly think that's an attribute that I try and extol every day if I can.
And I'm the same. Very much a kind of lifelong learner. It's why I love podcasting. Is actually I get to talk to really fascinating, interesting, fun people. I learn something new every single day.
Well, you're pretty good at it, Mike, as well.
Thank you. That's very kind, Chris. That's very kind.
Yeah, you got to be good at it. And to be fair, you've got a bit of a backlog of different podcasts you've done, haven't you? So it's all
exactly.
You're obviously very good at it.
It's a great medium because it's a way of. I was listening to Pat Flynn's podcast today. He's on episode, I think, 2000 of his podcast. He's been doing it since, I think, 2010. But he was talking about, the ability to build a relationship with someone in a meaningful way by having a dialogue. You can't do it through a blog. You can't do it through reading something or just watching what someone's done on a YouTube video or something. You need to have an interaction. You need to have an engagement of some kind.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? Podcasts, I find the best ones it's as if you're a fly on the wall with two mates in the pub, or
correct,
chatting over dinner or something. It's that's the beauty of it, isn't it? You can just have a chat. So,
and that's my style. That's my entire style. So on that point, because obviously we need a bit of a thought, a bit of a structure, or else people are going to think it's some sort of wander in the weeds. So we've got about 3 or 4 questions that we're going to cover. So let's just kick off with the first one, which is, so you're noticing a kind of shift with clients towards a kind of value-based pricing model, and also the kind of the challenges that brings. Do you want to just talk about kind of what you mean by value-based pricing models? And also, is it something that you're driving, or do you think it's something that clients are driving, or a bit of both?
Look, I think it's probably best to address the second point there. I definitely think, although it's moving very, very quickly, I still think the value-based pricing it's the tail in this instance is very much the agency. That's the tail wagging the dog in that kind of analogy. And but I do think there is a shift in the industry very, very gradually. I think on the first point, in a nutshell, and the way we tend to kind of phrase it within our business and to clients is that we focus on output and not input, because the input it's a bit like if you liken it to a made-to-measure or tailor-made suit. It's not actually the thread count and the work that's going into it. You are buying into that perfectly fit suit at the end of it. And actually, if that output and that outcome is aligned with what you're trying to achieve, then really the main question it sort of lands on being able to agree how much is that value worth?
Correct.
Can you get to an agreeable landing point on that? And that is in a nutshell how we sit.
So Blair Enns often talks about this kind of, you can buy activities, you can buy outputs, and you can buy outcomes. And historically, not all, but obviously a lot of clients have bought days from agencies. So you have timesheets and rate cards, and you're just buying activity, and that's got all sorts of problems with it. And what you're talking about is much more of a move towards, as a client, you're buying an output, something, and you're buying an outcome, some kind of improvement in your in the client's business. Out of interest, do you have a very broad proxy for the kind of the ratio of, I don't need the actual number, but broadly, is it like a 5-to-1 ratio between the total cost of working with an agency versus the total outcomes achieved? Or is it 10-to-1, or is it 2-to-1? Where do you think it is?
We don't have a fixed approach to that, Mike. I guess what you would, the way I would put it is that the whole value-based pricing shift, in order to deploy that effectively to clients, it has meant that agencies, and certainly we have had to do this over the last 5 or so years, is have real rigor in understanding the time and the input required to deliver the output. And that's multifaceted. So one, in order to run a profitable business on a value-based or outcome-based model, we have to have a really, really good idea as to the input and the time that's needed from a people cost point of view, from a sort of technology and license fee point of view too. But then also, kind of to your point there, it's a little bit harking back to the kind of working versus non-working ratio. Because it's absolutely not in either the agency's interests or the client's or brand's interests to increase the amount of administrative burden that's in there, because that will directly implicate the outcome we're trying to achieve or the price that we're trying to achieve it at. So we're absolutely looking to be as efficient as possible and ensure that kind of level of what would typically used to be called your non-working capital.
Yep.
Reduce the administrative input and maximize the amount of strategic and creative input to ensure that output is as successful as possible. And we keep a real eye on that piece. When we're creating solutions and what we're often referring to as products rather than services within our organization, we're laser focused on making sure that in order to achieve the value that we think that's worth, we need to ensure as much creative and strategic input is going in to deliver it. So that's the bit that we really focus on.
And are you seeing clients, because there is a huge difference across clients. I've seen different clients in different sectors. Some like value-based pricing, some welcome it, and some are much more skeptical. What's your kind of view? Does it change by sector, or is it just like each client's different?
I think that the key thing here is, and not to go off on a tangent, but at the end of the day, this is a podcast, isn't it? I think that when you get into a conversation with a brand and a lot of the time with procurement, you can get into a conversation that means that actually they're really liking the sound of value-based pricing. You're really trying to work through and understand what actually is motivating them, what are they trying to achieve, and then to the point of like, well, let's really understand what value that outcome delivers to your business. Yeah. And then if we can agree on that, then we can agree on a fair price. I think what's absent a lot of the time is that conversation, that two-way dialogue.
Do you start with that? Interestingly, do you start with I'm a big advocate of if you can't work out what the value is that you're trying to create, how on earth can you talk about price? Because it's meaningless.
Yeah. Well, this is it. And we touched on it on Thursday, didn't we? Where I know there are examples where you're completing an RFI or an RFP, which is asking you to put crosses in boxes.
Yep.
And a lot of the time that kind of directly conflicts with the way that we want to operate. But we often genuinely believe we can drive that business forwards and deliver growth to them. We are a genuinely different proposition. And, the thing that we often talk about, Mike, is that I don't think we're yet really good at the putting crosses in boxes point. What we are really good at is once we're at a point of having a conversation and developing that chemistry with clients and or procurements, we are very good at getting down to what ultimately is that objective, and then being able to kind of translate that into the way in which we work, and sort of demystify the whole value pricing piece. So I think that the process at the moment, although there are nuances in there, I think it's fundamentally a bit broken. I don't mean to put a sort of bold statement out there, but I do think that genuinely there are a lot of instances where brand is trying to achieve something, agencies out there that will genuinely deliver that and more, and they either stay where they are or they end up with someone that ultimately is really good at putting the crosses in the boxes. And that's not right for us. So I often really think, and the data supports it, is that if we can get to a conversation, if we can get to even something like, can we have 15 minutes of chemistry before we put this information in there? Because actually, I'm really happy to be challenged. If you can demonstrably show me that time is the right commodity in this this conversation, then one of the beauties of our business, I think, is that we're very modular with our pricing. If there's an approach that works, or a blend of different pricing models, then we'll apply that. But try and explain that in 150 words on a Word document. So I think, and I know I mentioned this to you before, but there is a quote from an author that talks a lot or writes a lot in our industry, called Chris Lima.
Right.
And he talks about the fact that, you never put a price in front of a client unless you really understand what's motivating them.
Yep.
And I just don't see, when you're asked to put an hourly rate in or a day rate in, or to be honest, the worst is trying to say, how many hours do you think this is worth? How many hours do you think you'll need from that performance manager or that account manager? It's like, I just don't have enough information. We haven't had a conversation. Do you know what I mean? I think that's
absolutely. And also, Chris, so let's definitely dig into the motivations piece. So this is it's easy to say. It's easy to say when you're talking to a human being, if you can't understand what's motivating them, then you can't negotiate with them, because all you'll hear is their demands. But putting it into practice, finding out someone's underlying interests, finding out what's really motivating them. There are some textbook techniques we can talk about, but how do you find it works best when you're with a client and you can tell they're talking at a surface level, and they're making certain demands, and they're being quite closed? How do you find out what's really motivating them?
I think, first of all, a huge piece that I really believe in is that when you're communicating, 80% of that effective communication is that you believe what you're saying in the first instance, right? So if you just don't believe what you're saying is true, then actually you're not going to break a deadlock there at all. And I think that's mirrored in the other direction. I think that authenticity that a brand, a client or procurement will feel, will allow them to open up and share more. I think the other point is empathy, right? So you've got, a lot of the time, an individual that you're talking to on the end of the phone, on a Zoom call, in person, they have macro challenges within their role, within their organization. They've got KPIs, but they've also got personal objectives and goals that they're trying to hit, and actually trying to understand how you can help them. Because if you take procurements in many instances, and it goes back to that triangle of doom, doesn't it? Is that, they have, you could argue that their motivations and their objectives are different to what a marketing director or a CMO.
Yeah. And in fact, they are. I mean, having been a procurement director, I often I worked in private equity-backed companies, so savings were all important, but so was the size of the preferred suppliers list, how many agencies we had, so was the quality and reliability that those suppliers were bringing to bear on our business, which is different than the brand director who might be looking for share of voice or to raise awareness for a new product launch or whatever it might be. So I think that misalignment of interests is really important.
Yeah, I think if you were trying to kind of simplify it a little bit, if we were to try and kind of if you take that triangle of doom, client, procurement, agency, and put it into a kind of straight line. On one side, the motivation is to have better than what they already have.
Yeah.
In some way, shape or form, whether it's better price, better value, better brand activation, better idea, whatever it is. And then the agency just wants to be paid what they're worth. It's not about they just want to be paid more or they just want more hours.
Yeah.
It's they want to be paid what they're worth. So then if you've then got it in that straight line, to me, it all comes down to being able to connect on a level that means let's pull out what the outcome or outcomes is or are that you're trying to achieve, and let's agree what that value is worth. So if what that outcome is going to deliver 100 million of value to your business, is it unreasonable that I'd like to be paid $1 million for that?
Right.
For example, and I know we're talking high level
exactly.
Numbers here, but if we can tangibly show that the value that we're going to deliver here, and everything in our pitch and everything that we talk about and our organisation, the way we set up and our values and all those sorts of things, we can show that we'll deliver that. Is it unreasonable that relative to that value, we would look to be paid that? Because that is what I believe it's worth. So there are your two, and I think you can include procurement in there, in that. But the key thing, and it goes back to it, Mike, and I know we're believers in this, is that you've got to have a conversation.
Yeah, exactly. An honest, frank, open conversation.
Yeah, I do, and I think that in the agency landscape, we're talking a lot more about this shift away from commoditized services, and if you put an RFP out essentially seeking commoditized services, you're not really going to be moving your business forward. Do you want something that's genuinely different and trying to do things different? Because it, in a sort of weird sort of way, it goes back to that wanting to always learn and push the boundaries and test. Because if you've got an agency that don't think they want to put crosses and boxes like everyone else, then let's have a conversation and let's talk about why there might be a new way and a different way of doing it. And that comes also to
we've talked before about RFP qualification. And I don't need to know again your exact numbers, but broadly, do you apply quite a lot of rigor when an RFP comes in about, is this in our sweet spot? Can we have access to someone to have an open conversation before we start writing, the 100-page document? How does that kind of work? Because I think that's a critical. Agents say to me all the time, my RFP conversion rate's gone down. And I'm like, okay, well, how do you qualify them? Well, the pipeline's a bit thin, so we're bidding for everything. I'm like, well, then your conversion rate will go down because you're bidding for too much.
Yeah.
Only bid for the stuff that you can really win. So how does it work?
100%. So I think that again is multifaceted because I did a talk with the Drum recently.
Oh yeah,
3 or 4 months ago, and I was asked about how are we winning new business? How are we growing that pipeline? How are we converting that pipeline? It was a really broad question, and the thing is, and not to bring the tone down, but I think there is a responsibility from agency leaders and agency owners to manage their workforce effectively, because for too long now, I think agencies have thrown resource at, tenuous RFPs and things they kind of know they're probably not going to get. And
exactly.
And we have to look after our staff's mental health. We have to look after people's capacity to do that. And I think the model of just saying, well, it's new business, so we'll stick around until 11 o'clock at night every night, which I've been there, I've done it. And it was, we won lots of new business, I guess, but we lost some as well. And I think that the correlation was that when you're burning the candle at both ends, you don't tend to win very much because it's a direct result of burnout, isn't it? And I think that agencies have a responsibility to manage that effectively. And if you can tangibly, stand up and say, we are at capacity, making sure that the clients we currently look after are delighted to be working with us, then we have no capacity to work on it anyway.
Yeah.
And so therefore, the mindset of, and I know this is true of our new business director and our new business team, is that, although they are motivated to be winning new business, they are absolutely at the forefront thinking, is this right for us? And is it a responsible use of our time? Can we actually do the job here? Because, and I think that's a huge part of our rigor. Now, Mike, is I think in the past you'd look at a pipeline and you'd say success is having a pipeline that's just full of RFPs.
Right.
And, you sat there and it's great, right? You sat there in a board meeting and you've got 100 RFPs sat in there and you go, that's awesome. We're not going to have any issue with the second half of our year or the next quarter because we've got all those RFPs in there.
Yeah.
And you think, but the amount of time that needs to go into converting those RFPs, potentially at the detriment to your existing clients, are you going to end up at square one?
Exactly.
And I think that is often overlooked. So, in short, I think that generally speaking, I think we're at about a sort of around the sort of 50% conversion rate on the RFPs that we work on, that we bid for, and I think that's a pretty good conversion rate. Good. And what I would say is that that's significantly higher if we get into a presentation, a face-to-face or a Zoom call somewhere where we can build rapport.
Yeah.
It's significantly higher than that.
Exactly.
In
fact, I'd say to anyone listening, any agency or anyone that's not in marketing agencies, anyone that's supplying services into large corporates, if you get an RFP and it says you can't talk to anyone until you've written your full response, sent it in, and then we might shortlist you, but it's going to take you, 5 people for 4 weeks. I'd just say, well, we're not bidding. Because how on earth can you get inside the mind of the client, understand the intricacies of their problems, the outcomes they're trying to achieve, and the complexity of the stakeholder group, if you can't talk to anyone? It's bonkers.
100%. And I think there's an interesting one here as well. And again, having, I've worked at other agencies in the past, and I think there's also, going back to the authenticity point, we try as much as possible, if we can understand what the motivations are, if we're going to work with a brand or a client for 3, 4, 5 plus years, then actually having a load of your senior people, your new business team, in a meeting, pitching this idea, and then winning the business, and then a completely new team with a new set of ideas working on it. Is that really getting you value? Because I think exactly. What we really try and do is we try and go for what we call a business first versus people first approach to resourcing an account. And if we're talking to that brand or client about what they're trying to achieve, before we get right into that pitch process, we can actually really consider who the right person within our organization is to really lead that.
Exactly.
And that's how you create. And I know, again, lots happened last Thursday, didn't it? But we talked about partnerships.
Yeah.
And partnerships and Gareth talked about this, was that it hinges so much on the individuals that are involved, because we all work in quite sort of idiosyncratic and unique ways, and you have to build that kind of direct rapport. So we feel building that partnership is ultimately going to be about really understanding, what we think the right idea is going to be and how we price that and how we resource that. But the individual that's going to be in that presentation and then and actually standing there saying, I'm going to be your lead. I'm going to drive the growth here for you, and I'm going to understand your business as well as you do, so I can provide the solutions that are right to deliver that. I think that's a really key differentiator, and we're not. I think too often it's sort of put your A team in a presentation format or something, and it all sounds great.
We used to at KPMG. Yes, this is going back a long time. I'm quite old. We used to call it, and it was the thing that you were never allowed to do as consultants. Partners would say to us, never, ever, ever send the A team to pitch and the B team to deliver. Because that's the sure way to really, really irritate a client from day one.
100%.
It's just completely pointless. So you're right. You find the right, once you're at the early stages of qualification, finding the right person to lead it inside your business. And when they stand in front of the client on several meetings, it's like, I am the person that will be leading this piece of work.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's going to start right from chemistry.
It is. Exactly right. So Chris, I'm very conscious of your time. So we're slightly over. So thanks ever so much for joining us on the Higgle B2B Sales podcast. Just like, give us a quick bit about where can people find out more about you and anything else you want to say about your business before we part.
Sure. Like any business nowadays, we're online. So
absolutely.
So usually the best.
It'd be pretty awful if you weren't. Yeah, exactly.
So spaceandtime.co.uk, A&D time that is, so we've got a really active blog on there. But we tend to, although we have the sort of setup of our business, as I was talking about earlier, kind of straddles both that media and tech piece, and we're talking about solutions that we're delivering within that. We also really tailor them to specific sectors. Right. So we have cut our teeth over a long period of time across a number of sectors with kind of real pedigree, I think, across the health care space, property space, e-commerce, retail commerce of late. And so we often tend to publish articles and information about solutions and ideas and opportunities specifically within verticals, which I think often is the way in which a brand side marketer would see it. We're also obviously very active on LinkedIn, as you would have thought, but we also run quarterly workshops with different sectors and kind of different areas of our business and what's going on in the sector. And we have one coming up in a few months, actually, that's specifically around omnichannel.
All right.
But there's a long pipeline coming up around responsible use of AI, effective use of AI. We've got some hyper-local activation, thought leadership coming up. And more often than not, I tend to turn up to the opening of an envelope. So you'll usually see me at different events, industry gigs, that kind of stuff. And so come up and say hi. I'd love to chat.
Chris, it's been amazing. Thank you ever so much indeed for being an amazing guest on our podcast series. Thank you.
No trouble at all, Mike. Good to see you.
You too. See you soon, Chris. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Higgle, the B2B Sales Club podcast series with your host, Mike Lander. Please subscribe so that you'll catch all the next episodes.